when I write a book, I basically write a book based on looking at what is a major dysfunction in the world, and
Mm,
are of the major dysfunctions in the world, is there any that I could have an impact on?
mm.
And the one that I felt I might be able to have an impact on and be able to solve was the dysfunction of not being able to handle personal criticism
Yes,
without
yeah.
becoming defensive, and then also not knowing how to appreciate one's partner.
Mhm.
And that's that ability to know how to give appreciation specifically,
Yeah.
not just generally, is a huge booster of somebody feeling good about themselves.
This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. I am Frank Schaeffer, and my guest today is Dr. Warren Farrell. And Dr. Warren Farrell has been chosen by the Financial Times as one of the world's top 100 thought leaders. Dr. Farrell has been a pioneer in both the women's movement, elected 3 times to the board of the National Organization of Women in New York, as well as the men's movement. He was called by GQ magazine, quote, the Martin Luther King of the men's movement, end quote. He is the author of many books published in over 50 countries and in 19 languages. He is currently working on the Ma crisis. That's MA, like for mother, I imagine. The Ma crisis.
The,
What's
the, the man
Oh,
crisis.
sorry. Well, guess what? It was talking of updates. They put a little thing there to help me, and it didn't. The man crisis.
It's
And
funny.
a book we talked about before is The Boy Crisis. So we discussed that on another podcast a while back. His most recent books are The Boy Crisis, which we've talked about in another context, and Role Mate to Soulmate, which we will be talking about today. And as I said, this is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, and I would ask you to subscribe right now on YouTube and to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We go live on YouTube first, and then it comes out as a podcast on those various venues. And on Substack, to my commentary page, it has to be said at frankschaeffer.substack.com. And you can follow my new project at thegospelofzip.com. You can also support our work and these podcasts by making a tax-deductible donation at georgebailey.org. So I read the book on Kindle. You've got it sitting there in case I need you to wave it around for me. And I do a thing. I forget if I did this last time we talked. We were really sort of being hosted by someone else, so maybe I didn't. But I tend to go through the book and pull pieces out that I then string together in an order that pleases me in terms of introducing the book, but it isn't in context or sequential. So I'm just gonna start by doing some reading here to give people a feeling of Rollmate to Soulmate, the 7 secrets to lifelong love. Rollmate to Soulmate is designed to both deepen love and provide an omnipresent and specific structure to help you rebuild love that has suffered from the natural responses of defensiveness and anger. The secret to feeling loved is feeling understood. Why no one says, I want a divorce, my partner understands me. The underlying secret is that making the evolutionary shift from the biologically natural process of falling in love to the unnatural process of sustaining and deepening love requires both art and discipline. Discipline and love don't sound like they go together. In this book, it will be clear why they are inseparable for the journey from roommate to soulmate. We developed sustainable technology before we developed sustainable relationships. Roommate to soulmate introduces a practice that incorporates 23 love enhancements so we can begin to catch up. Soulmate love then requires an evolutionary shift, and this is a big point you make, in the way we handle personal criticism. Why? Because the more we love someone, the more vulnerable we feel. The more vulnerable we feel, the more the criticism hurts. If the criticism is given badly, it hurts more. And all criticism from a loved one is perceived as given badly, exclamation point. The secret to feeling soulmate love is feeling understood. One more passage. No matter what generation or gender, there is a universal lack of awareness about one thing, that has the potential for turning rigid expectations and judgments into a gentler discussion of trade-offs. That one thing is an awareness of exactly how the qualities it takes to become successful at work are often in tension with the qualities it takes to be successful in love. So that is not what your book is about in total, but it gave me, by putting those together, it gave me a feel for the book, and I hope it represents what you're saying. I really like the book. And coincidentally, it happens that I spent the last 7 years working on a project. It's called The Gospel of Zip, that I mentioned to you before, that tells the love story that I experienced, my wife Jeannie and I, who've been together 56 years, and we have 3 kids and 5 grandchildren. And it was a really good preparation for working on your book and reading it. You quote some people that I have followed closely, like Esther Perel and some others, but from someone who is looking back over a long marriage and a relationship, and as a father and grandfather, very engaged in childcare with my 3 of my youngest grandchildren right now. I can honestly tell people that of the kind of how-to books that I've dabbled in or read little bits of, including Esther Perel on sexuality and marriage and relationships, Soulmate is by far the best. In other words, this is a book I would actually give people and say, hey, this contains the kind of wisdom that's taken me 56 years of marriage and being in a relationship to learn, both good and bad. A lot of mistakes that had I read Soulmate, when I was a teenager and Jeannie and I fell in love, it would have given me a really good map of how this was going to work and what to follow. So I really love your book. I like the practicality of it. I like the exercises. And as I say, the only bits that I'm kind of unfamiliar with are things that, you've put in a way very specifically. Here's, 20 things you can do. These are the lessons I've learned. But they reflect the life I've lived. So I'll just end this overlong introduction by saying this. If someone writes a novel or a nonfiction book and they happen to describe the town you grew up in, and it's a small village, like mine was a little farming village in Switzerland, literally totally off the map, 350 cows, maybe 120 people. And if you described that and said, this is what it was like in 1963, well, I was there. I lived it. So I actually know. And all I can tell you is that as a man who's been loving one woman for 56 years and doing very badly sometimes and lots of regrets and things I would have done differently, but nevertheless, looking back now, having learned a lot, including a lot of mistakes that took a lot of time to repair, you've described a country or a village, if you like, of relationships that I really know. I've lived this. So I'm not coming to this as a young person who doesn't know anything about relationships. I'm not coming to this as someone who's just, 17 years into a marriage and seeing how it's working out. I've lived a whole life. You know what you're talking about. I now have a book on relationships that I will give people who ask me questions. End of introduction.
Well, thank you. That is, you are the first person who's ever read that book that spent 56 years preparing for it.
Yep. Yep.
And I really appreciate that
Yeah.
because, as a person who's a little bit older myself, I
Yeah.
certainly have seen that, the only thing that is better as you get older is wisdom,
Yeah.
and most people don't pay attention to it. So I have to
Yeah.
write books to find out the few people that do pay attention to it. So
Yeah.
I deeply appreciate that.
Well, I really appreciate the book. And so let me continue to talk about it in specifics. You say in From Civil War to Civil Dialogue, this is one of the sections, will apply what we learned to do with our loved one, provide a safe environment for their criticisms, concerns, and possibly never to be agreed upon perspectives on any given issue. So I'm going to dive out of those quotes and just go to something very specific that I had not thought about until I read it in your book. And that is the fact that evolution prepared us to fall in love. Evolution did not prepare us to stay in love. And I've never seen anybody put it this way before. So before we go into any specifics, I want you to explain what you mean by that, because I thought it was brilliant, but I'd rather have it come from you.
Thank you. Yes, evolution prepared us to sort of feel that male-female tension and attraction and chemistry to each other and have sex and reproduce
Yeah.
and that's it. And so that would and then the more the man went off and did that with many, many women, the more reproduction, the
Mm.
more the more people, the higher percentage of the chance of somebody surviving from that process. However, that was, and so to do that, they sort of like at least fell in sexual romance and fantasy
Mhm.
with each other. But it was not necessarily, but the training to sustain that, to be really understood, those things were not necessary for survival. That's why our grandparents and so on, and even today we take the vows for better or for worse,
Sure.
not for soulmate or for worse, aromatically
Yeah. Yeah.
type of thing. And it's and so our parents and grandparents, if they were not understanding each other, the man went off and got drunk. The woman went off and talked to her women friends about how terrible he was, and they both sort of released something for the system, or they went out and they performed in the community good services.
Mm.
They joined the church. They got community there, but they weren't dependent upon their partner being able to provide a safe environment for the
Mm.
feelings and concerns and criticisms. The result was that both men and women, or in same-sex couples, both people, the difference in same-sex couples is only a little bit worse with women. Women don't do as well with each other
Yeah.
as men do with each other, or
Mm.
but that's a secondary issue. The important issue is that we have learned that we needed to, when survival was mastered to a greater degree, especially in the middle and upper middle class, people started having higher expectations. And that
Yeah.
higher expectation is, I'm not okay if we get into an argument and you hit me, and then we get into another argument and you hit me again, and this is not okay.
Yeah.
We didn't have the privilege of being able to say that in the old days. We do have that privilege of being able to have options of whether we want to
Mhm.
be together or not. And so our expectations have risen, and yet we have no one, virtually no one that I know of, has learned how to handle personal criticism from their loved one without becoming defensive. That was
Yeah,
the
and you make that's a thread that runs all through the book. And before we get into all of that, let's
Mhm,
just go to one thing you mentioned now, and that was expectations. I found in your opening you were saying something very fascinating to me, and that is the difference in expectation when marriage and having children was about survival and
mhm,
what we have now. And just talk a little bit about, and you used the example of our grandparents versus, say, the present generation
mhm.
or your generation versus grandparents, but even more so with younger people. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the expectations of women and the careerism we've lived in, which has changed things again. But I thought that point was a big one. And again, it carries through the book in terms of the expectations of the present are different than the expectations of the past. And so
Absolutely.
when we take the template of relationships from the past and you start saying, well, my grandparents, thus and so,
Mhm.
talk a little bit how about that really doesn't apply to the present now in the same way, because I thought that generational gap was really interesting in the way you set that up early in the
Well,
book.
thank you. Yes. Yeah, our parents, if they didn't even expect to have their partner understand them,
Yeah.
they went out, the guys talked with guys and the women talked with women, and we each had our own language. And now, and we just accepted that because, the guy was providing usually, and so therefore the family was surviving if he was doing it well. And the woman was taking care of the children and raising them, and the
Yeah.
family was just surviving. That
Mm.
was the only expectation. But as we get, the middle and upper middle classes in developed nations, and only in developed nations,
Mm.
we started to say, I want something more from my partner than that. When I don't want to be walking around on eggshells all the time, because my partner is doing something I don't like. But if I say something, he or she will just blame me for something
Sure.
that's been repressed, and then we'll escalate and we'll end up with a huge argument. Maybe somebody will end up hitting the other one, and it never turns out okay.
Yeah.
But now people are saying, and should be saying, I want to be able to so what I looked at is that when I write a book, I basically write a book based on looking at what is a major dysfunction in the world, and
Mm,
are of the major dysfunctions in the world, is there any that I could have an impact on?
mm.
And the one that I felt I might be able to have an impact on and be able to solve was the dysfunction of not being able to handle personal criticism and
Yes,
not
yeah.
becoming defensive. And then also not knowing how to appreciate one's partner.
Mm, mm.
So many, people will sometimes say something like, let's say we're at Thanksgiving dinner and somebody says, gee, I want to tell you my wife's a good cook, and
Yeah,
maybe if she cooked the dinner, and so that feels good to the wife that says has been told she's a good
sure.
cook. But if you say, I really love the way you made the skin on that turkey really
Yeah,
crisp, and how did you do that and yet keep the turkey itself moist? And you also have very moist stuffing. It's often dried out, I know, but with you kept it moist. And then
yeah,
what about the spices on that? Was that parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme, or some other Simon and Garfunkel spice?
yeah, yeah,
And so now your wife feels, sort of ask questions about how to explain how wonderful she is
yeah,
in very specific terms in front of the whole group, the whole family. And that's that ability to know how to give appreciation specifically,
yeah.
not just generally, is a huge booster of somebody feeling good about themselves. And
Mm,
so and that's so important, and that's only a part of the process. That's a spontaneous compliment, but less as you had mentioned at the outset, the subtitle of the workshops I do is the art and discipline of love. So that I just gave you an example of the art
yeah,
being
yeah. And you talk
specific.
about make your compliment specific. So just to
Yes.
sort of introduce the scope of the book, Soulmate is divided into four parts. In part one, foundational wisdom, I outline 15 differences between role mates and soulmates, and introduce the 23 love enhancements that facilitate becoming a soulmate. And by the way, just tell people who are listening, 23 love enhancements sounds, like a lot of work and it's going to be complicated, but actually it's very common sense stuff. And as I say, so much intuitively that I've learned over the years by mistakes that I do differently now are things that, are very much those 23 love enhancements that can be discovered, but it's easier to read the book and start working on it. Okay, back into this. I introduced four common depleters of love, or the four C's: criticism, complaining, control, and complacency. So let's stop there for a minute and just talk about those four depleters before we get into the positive stuff on how to rebuild relationships. So, just dive into those a little bit like you do in the book.
Yes, the criticism we've already talked about a little bit,
Yeah,
and that's the single biggest one. And people feeling that they have to walk on eggshells rather than being able to say what they really feel.
yeah,
And then then controlling. Most people feel when somebody else is giving them saying something about them that isn't ideal, they
mm,
feel very controlled by that.
yeah.
And that makes them shrink. Complacency. There was the other C before complacency was blanking here. The criticism.
Yeah, the depleters are criticism, complaining, control, and complacency.
Yes, so complaining. Before I get to complacency, complaining, like oftentimes, let's say I recommend a movie to my wife Liz, or
Mm,
a restaurant to somebody,
yeah,
and we go to the restaurant together, and the service is a little bit poor, or
sure.
the waiter is a little gruff. And so my wife, let's say my wife Liz says something like, "Gee, the service was kind of poor here," and and the soup didn't have much spice in it,
Mm,
and she feels she's complaining about the restaurant. But since I recommended the restaurant, I
yeah,
feel she's
yeah.
complaining about me. And so
Yeah, I thought that was a good example. Very
Oh,
true to life.
thank you. And the same type of thing with a movie. This is sort of movie season.
Exactly.
Recommend a movie, and I recommended some movies this year, and what my daughter said was just so about one that I thought was the best movie of the year.
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, she's criticizing the movie. On the other hand, I'm feeling a little bit like, oh, I was at fault. Complacency is a tricky one. The Most people, when they are preparing for their first date, they're putting on makeup or they're trimming their beard or they're, making sure everything is perfect. They're remembering which outfit they had on that most people thought they looked best in, and
Mm,
they're preparing all this for that first date. And then somebody's living with somebody for 10 years or 5 years or 3 years, and they're walking around in their underwear. They're walking around in some old, pajamas or whatever,
mm,
and maybe they're not shaving. They're not putting some makeup on. They're not doing their hair. They're letting it go 3 or 4 days, and then it's Saturday, and they're going out to a party.
mm.
And the wife is saying, "Which outfit do you think looks best?" And the husband is maybe doing some version of the same and trimming his beard and so on.
Yeah.
And so the underlying feeling is often like, "Gee, everybody else is more important than I am." And that feels really bad.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the what it also is a possible way of looking at that is that I'm relaxed around you. I don't have to sort of prove myself
Yeah.
around you.
Yeah.
And so what I talk about to do in Rollmate to Soulmate is not to assume that complacency is either
Mm,
good or bad, but discuss what it feels like to you for your partner to be
mm.
that way, or for us to be that, for you to be that way.
Yeah.
Do you feel much more relaxed and therefore comfortable with your partner
Mm,
as a result of being able to do any of those things?
mm.
Or do you feel more like taken for granted? Or do
Yeah.
you feel both at different times? And if so, what would be an optimum way for your personalities to work that through?
Yeah. And I just want to mention, and then I have a philosophical question to ask you to the reader. When you get into this, these problems, Warren brings these problems up, such as criticism and so forth, but then has incredibly good practical ways to deal with this. Then, again, as someone who's been through a lot of this, I found those so true. Like, oh yeah, this actually works. I know that because I learned the hard way, or this works because I've seen it work. But I want to jump into a philosophical thing before we go further. You've written very well in The Boy Crisis and also in other contexts on men and the way they are perceived by women and the kind of way that men have lost out in some of the competitiveness between men and women in the last 20, 30 years. You've been part of the feminist movement in the National Organization of Women. So you're not someone coming at this from the sort of manosphere perspective. So, to me, you're a trusted voice on this. So my philosophical question to you is this, and that is, um, with the advent of the fact that the last couple of generations have been dealing with something new here, which is women with access to income without men, and women looking for men who still earn more than they do. You want the provider. So there's enough of the old model left to define that. How much of these problems that you've written about in things like the boy crisis are insoluble unless women actually change the way they look at men? And that it goes for the relationships of trying to be married, trying to be with someone. Because I remember last time we talked, you said something to the effect of that really touched me because I'm a grandfather who actually does this in terms of childcare. And that is, that women ought to broaden their perspectives of who they marry if they want to be married at all or have children with anybody at all, and include men perhaps who are earning less than them and who will be very proud that they go out and have this brilliant career that the man can support. So you've thought about this because we've talked about it. But I just want to ask you a sort of an overarching vision of this because you've lived through these periods of history, the feminist movement into the present. How much of this problem is insoluble without the participation of women and their change of mind in some ways? Because, of course, there's a lot of women authors, younger and older, who are writing books, a lot of books, some of which I've interviewed about, everything that men need to do. And they're really complaining about men, and they're really complaining about who's out there to date, and they're really complaining about all this. And the women seem to have a license to do this. Less often do you see men who are able to answer back without being insulting or joining the manosphere or any of this kind of crazy stuff. And you're one of those people who has done some answering back with the boy crisis and other things. So, what is the overarching philosophical observation you've made of what is possible if women continue to demand a lot from men, but don't ever look at where women are going in these things, because it is a two-way street, and you've written and talked about this.
It is really a two-way street, and neither sex has both sexes have evolutionarily prepared themselves to be somebody that is no longer nearly as relevant now that women can earn their own money. It was very necessary. If you look at the Titanic, the movie,
Sure.
and how the parents were saying to the Kate Winslet character,
Yeah.
you've got to you've got to marry somebody who has money
Yeah.
because we survive based on that.
Mm.
And so that's evolutionarily built into women at a very deep level. But the problem is that when you focus on the men who are going to earn the most money, in order to earn the most money, you have to disconnect. You have to really focus on working
Mm.
50, 60 hours a week, especially when you're young and the children are young. And you have to not acknowledge, you have to not ask for help, because if you ask for help from another man, it will show a vulnerability, and the other man will say, well, maybe he's not ready for, being promoted. And as a result, you'll look bad to your wife, you'll look bad to yourself, you'll look bad to the people at work,
Mm.
to your classmates at a high school, college reunion, etc. And so men lose everything by being vulnerable in the old model of having to be successful.
Mm.
But yet women are correctly wanting now men who are vulnerable, but they're incorrectly focusing only on the men who are earning as much or more, or who have a potential to earn as much or more than they do. Uh,
Yeah.
and so they're competing for,
Or who have a comparable level of education, because that's sort of the same thing,
yes, well, no, not quite. If a
or
man is
potential to earn.
yes, if a man is a an anthropologist and
Mm.
is and there's it's a time in history when there's not as much need for anthropologists
Mm.
as there, and he is therefore really unemployed for all practical
Yeah. Yeah.
purposes. She's not interested. If,
Yeah.
on the other hand, he owns a plumbing firm and he earns $250,000 a year, then even though he doesn't have that sort of fine status of being the
Yeah.
PhD, let's say, the fact that he's earning $250,000 a year means a lot. She'll compromise some of the status of the PhD
Yeah.
for the money that's being earned. And so, but what women are missing in this, women are missing for themselves in this, is I have a great many women, feminist women, who will say to me things like, it's unfair that men can be have-it-all men and we women cannot be have-it-all women.
Yeah.
And I say that's actually not true. You can be a have-it-all woman. What's a have-it-all woman? A have-it-all person is
Mm.
somebody who has a career, has children that are well raised, and can participate in raising those children, but is not prevented from having a good career and breaking the glass ceiling, type
Mm.
of thing. In order to break the glass ceiling, but what can she have? She can marry a man or choose a man who is not so much a provider protector, but
Mm.
rather a nurturer connector.
Yeah.
And that and then and say and when she finds that type of man, say, I really want to, break a glass ceiling. That's what my life. Are you interested? I see you're very sensitive, you're very caring, you listen very well. Would you be interested in having children if we got married? And then with those children, you take care of the children full time. I'll provide the income. That way I can completely focus on that. Would that be something that you would want? And 49% of men, according to the Pew Research study, 49% of men who are working full time
Yeah.
say they would prefer to be full time with their children than
Mm.
working full time.
It's
So
so
there's a
interesting. Is
huge,
there a comparable number when women are interviewed in the same sort of way.
Why I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think
But to have almost half of men say they'd rather be with their kids is pretty amazing.
it's really amazing, and nobody even asks that question of men.
Yeah,
Instead of like assume that when men and women have children, what happens is two things. Women say, "What do I want to do here? Do I want to raise the children full t if she's married to a man that
sure.
earns a decent amount of money?" She says, "Do I want to raise the children full time? Do I want to work full time, or do I want to do some combination of both?"
Mm,
The man usually says, he has three options too. Option one is, do I want to work full time? Option two is, do I want to work full time? And
mm.
option three is, do I want to work full time?
Yeah.
And, and families have this discussion, and it's just assumed that that man will consider working full time, as opposed to that man being the one that takes care of the children and
Yeah.
is that nurturer connector. But that involves knowing how to choose a nurturer connector. And that also involves something else that women have not been trained to do, which is take the risks of sexual rejection.
Mm,
Example, you're at a party and and you're single and you check out with the host, who at this party is eligible. And the host says, well, there's a doctor, there's a lawyer, there's a dentist. Um, and so and the woman will sort of focus on those people recommended by the host, as opposed to coming to that party and saying, let me look around here and see which man is listening to a woman, which
mm,
man is not just interrupting, but asking her questions.
mm.
And then instead of flirting with that man and hoping he comes over to me, maybe I should go over to him directly. And if he doesn't ask me for my phone number, maybe I should ask him for his.
Yeah.
And then I'll call him. Now she is doing the type of thing that would not normally happen with a man who was highly successful, because men who are highly successful have learned how to be resilient to
Mm,
rejection.
mm.
But the men who are highly successful are also highly successful at going to woman number one, having sex with her, then going to woman number two, having sex with her, and so on. The man who is at that party, who is more nurturer connector, is much less likely to be that way. He
Yeah.
often needs more initiative on her part. Now, that's not a good choice for a woman who wants a man to take care of the family economically.
Mm.
But it's a very good choice for a woman who wants a man to be a full-time father,
Caregiver,
while she
sure.
a caregiver, and take care of the social activities and driving the children to, and all the hundreds of
Yeah.
things that traditional women do. That is very taxing, and but
Mm-hmm.
certain types of men do this better than women, just like certain types of women produce income better than men.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that mirrors my life journey and experience in that, when Jeannie and I got together as teenagers, she was pregnant when we were 17 and 18, and that's 56 years ago. Growing
Wow.
to now, I was very involved as a father caregiver in the sense that I was self-employed. I was in the movie business, and our version of what you were saying was to bring the kids to the sets in Hollywood where I was directing pictures and so forth. And also, I like to cook and gradually moved into that. But by the time we got to our grandchildren, I was doing as much as Jeannie, my wife, was, and we were full-time caregivers. And I gave up work and reordered my life to be that grandfather. I
Mhm.
live near my grandchildren. This morning I got up early to work as I always do, and the first thing I did was finish packing 3 school lunches for my grandchildren who live nearby because they like my cooking and they still want to eat my food even though they're in high school now.
Ah,
And, the best thing that ever happened was my grandson, who's 15, came to my wife, Jeannie, and said, what I want for Christmas, if I can have it, Nana, is for you to get Ba to cook me my school lunches. That's what I want for a Christmas present. So, I got up this morning and I packed a good lunch for each of them. And I asked his sisters, okay, Jeannie has given me to Jack for this Christmas present. And you're going to, are you going to be jealous? And both of the girls said, yes, we are. And so now I'm doing three. Well, far from that being a burden, I'm one of the guys you're talking about because to me, that was the best part of my day. I looked at the clock when it was 12:30 here and I actually was thinking of them saying, hey, they're sitting down on my lunch, roast potatoes, thinly sliced steak, broccoli. I baked some focaccia for them last week. There's a piece in there and it gives me more pleasure than anything else I'll do today
well,
because I'm part of their lives and having been invested in those three lives since they were born, um, this is huge to me.
Mm.
I live for this. So if you had told me 56 years ago, when you're 73, the best thing you will do that makes you happiest is helping with three school age kids, I wouldn't have known exactly what you were saying. But now it's not a question of a choice anymore. This is the aesthetic truth of my life. So
Mm.
now I don't know how women feel about childcare, but I know how I feel. And I have met other men who feel the same. There's this former Marine. My son was a Marine who comes and helps me around the yard sometimes. I've known him for 5 or 6 years, so we're no longer trying to do this male thing. So what he does, the first thing he does is pull out his camera to show me pictures of how his granddaughter's doing and tell me what he's doing for her. And I put a crib together last week, and she's walking around now, and so forth and so on. So I know what you're saying is true in
Yeah.
terms of that 40%. I don't find that hard to believe. So my philosophical question to you is, do you think that there are women who are understanding this now who say in the second wave of feminism weren't talking about this? I'm not talking about the whole trad wife thing and all this stuff. I'm just saying, are there people out there who get that there are other kinds of men they could be looking for, perhaps should be looking for, and might even be happy with, who want to fix school lunches like I do,
Yeah.
rather than do some big, whatever it is thing. So, what do you see in terms from the way you're observing things as someone who teaches this and lives it? What are you seeing?
So the first thing I'm saying is my new book is going to be called How to Become Frank Schaeffer's Grandson. Um,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
this is wonderful. So second, yes, some women will say that they do want a man who's nurture, connector, who would have that type. They would think
Mm,
that what you're doing is wonderful.
mm,
However, the process that I described before as to how to get to that man is what almost no woman that I've ever met knows how to do, which is
yeah.
why I put that in the Boy
Yeah.
Crisis book, which is not just consider that type of man as highly eligible, in part because he is a nurturer connector that will free me to conquer whatever glass ceiling I want to conquer,
Yeah.
but then also to how to spot him at a party
Mm,
because he's listening, like I was mentioning, and then how to
yeah.
take that initiative of going up and initiating with him, and then getting the phone number and then calling. That's a five-step process.
And by the way, how did that translate to online dating? Because a lot of people are doing that now. They're not really
Yes, let me.
partying.
What I'm going to say now, if you're a woman listening, or a woman or a man who has a daughter, is really going to be important.
Mm,
So this is online dating is the topic, and many women are very hesitant to date online.
mm,
First of all, they say I've met a lot of jerks online, a lot of men who exaggerate or present a wrong picture, and so on. But number one is that it only that to get the right partner, you have to be like a Babe Ruth king. Babe Ruth was the king of strikeouts and was the king of home runs. But you only need one home run to make it happen. So
mm,
all the losers, all the people that you feel were not appropriate for, that's fine. That's the type of risks that men take when they go up to women and so on. And we want you to be able to have those types of risks.
yeah.
Second is typically speaking, women had veto power, but they didn't have original choice power. Here's the
Mm,
difference, and this is huge. Um, Veto power was a man would come up to a woman who was attractive and flirt with her, and she could say yes or she could say no.
mm,
But she was limiting herself unconsciously to the men who had the guts to come up and risk that rejection.
yeah.
But what I want for women is not just veto power, but to have original choice power, which is and what online dating provides is
Mm,
that you can look over 50, 60, 70, 100 choices, and you can start with the choice that is your choice,
mm,
rather than just vetoing somebody else who's attracted to you.
mm, mm,
When you reach out to a man, even if he was not the type of man who would have seen you and reached out to you,
mm,
he starts beginning to consider and open up and seeing what you have to offer. And you end up more frequently with a man that is your choice. Now,
mm, mm.
why is your choice so important? Because historically speaking, if you hear somebody say happy wife, happy life,
Yeah,
almost every man agrees. And
yeah,
most women say something like I've often said that, and the women say, hey, pay attention to him. He's a relationship expert.
yeah,
He knows happy wife, happy life.
yeah,
And so if happy wife, happy life has any germ of truth, and it does,
yeah,
it's important for you to make the choice as to who resonates with you for you. And
yeah.
when you choose him, you're more likely to be happy. And when you're more likely to be happy, he's more likely to be happy.
Yeah, and by the way, that is so true in terms of reflecting what I've discovered. Um, Basically, the story of this book, The Gospel of Zip, is that learning curve. And I know this sounds too easy and trite, but honestly, my life began to radically change because I talk about having been groomed to be an asshole by divine right because I was raised in a fundamentalist home that said men are in charge, they got to be tough, they got to discipline. And from that, and I can honestly say, having been together with Jeannie for 56 years, the reason why we are still together is one of the big reasons is that a change occurred when I discovered what you just said, happy wife, happy life. And I love Jeannie passionately, but that's not the same as learning how to love her. And for me, the big change came, and it sounds simple, but it's not, and it took work. But about 25 years ago, I began to honestly get up in the morning, and my first thought every day was, how can I give Jeannie the best day she's ever had?
Wow.
And as soon as I began to actually live according to that,
Mhm,
and not perfectly by any means, lots
mhm,
of ups and
mhm,
downs, I'm not holding myself up. I'm
mhm.
doing the opposite. I'm talking about how much better that worked than the other attitude of how can I be in charge?
Yes.
And it really changes everything. I mean, it's a totally different situation when you love someone enough to actually really genuinely want to give them the best day they ever had every single day. Now, that sounds dramatic, but it's a thousand little things. And one of them was in the area of child care and
Mhm,
just the simple unfairness of seeing how much work she was doing, how I wasn't pulling my weight. And I really began to change things.
mhm,
So, little stuff. It's been at least 25 years since Ginny's ever, unloaded a dishwasher. I cook our meals. I do the grocery shopping. I don't do all the quote woman's work. I build, I do stuff. I do childcare. I do podcasts. I write. I paint. I still have a kind of a career. I'm not completely retired or anything. But the fact of the matter is, it didn't take hours a day. It didn't take that much time to move into areas where she wasn't having fun doing that stuff.
mhm, mhm.
Now, there's things that I don't have any ability to do. Jeannie does all our financial planning. She does our tax stuff and estate things. She's always done that. She can do numbers and she has that kind of a mind. I don't. So I was looking for other areas that weren't giving her pleasure. And literally, it only takes an hour or two a day. And I've taken everything off her plate that I can that isn't giving her her best day. And it's
Yeah.
made a huge difference to us. And I'm sure it's different for different couples. But honestly, if I can pass on one thing to men, hey, you want a happy wife or a partner, whoever it is, you will have a happy life. And the first thing to do is every single day get up and say, what can I do today that will give her the best possible day that I can contribute to? I can't do everything, but what can I do? And it's completely changed our lives. I mean, that I didn't do that in one day, but as I incrementally went from asshole by divine right to the kind of guy that gets up in the morning and says, what can I do for you? Changed everything.
That's
And one of those things is learning to listen and really, and change things. And of course,
yeah.
all the things you talk about in your book. I'm going to dive back in here. You say in Mating in Captivity, a book I quote, by the way, extensively in my book, The Gospel of Zip. Couples therapist Esther Perel articulately shares how the gap between our survival sex role of sex for procreation and our current goal for sex, passion and excitement, are in conflict. I want you to explain that a little bit. The next thing you say is survival sex was all about stability and creating children to enhance survival. Sex as passion is ignited by novelty, fantasies of obstacles, and so forth. So you talk about sex from the point of view of how to kind of compensate for the fact that, as you put it in your book, which was a new thought to me, we're actually pushing against how evolution has trained us.
Yes.
But if you want to be having good sex, I mean, that's open to definition. You've got to understand what Warren is saying here. How do you push back? Now, Jeannie and I, and I'm not breaking any secrets here because I write about this in the Gospel of Zip. As we got older, we found that scheduling sex worked. In other words, you don't just wait for it to happen. You have this need. Okay, so when are we going to do it? And how are we going to make this work? Given that we have busy lives, and so that doesn't sound very passionate, but it actually worked better than just waiting for stuff to happen. And I'd never seen it as pushing back against evolution, but now I understand because I read Rollmate to Soulmate. So talk a little bit about Farrell and your vision of that, because I just found that to be so true. When you got into that, I thought, oh yeah, he knows what he's talking about. I've experienced this. And
Yes.
you do feel you're pushing back against something. It doesn't come naturally.
Yes.
And I never saw anybody lay it out as well as you have, and I'd like to hear about it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is a really tough one, and there's no easy answer to this.
Yeah.
Some people have, kept the excitement in sex by being polyamorous or having an open marriage, what used to be called an open marriage, things
Yeah.
like that. Other people, but most people, a lot of people want a stable marriage, and open marriages oftentimes create enormous amounts of other problems,
Yes.
especially if there are children involved. And so, and scheduling sex sounds so boring.
Yeah.
And it is compared to sort of just seeing somebody at a party and beginning to feel whether there's excitement there or something
Sure.
not, and then disappearing into the restroom or the person who's hosting the party's bedroom and
Yeah.
being sexual. Those are very biologically, naturally exciting
Of
things.
course. Yeah.
But scheduling sex is very helpful because it does at least give you an opportunity to sort of give yourselves permission and set aside time
Yeah.
to actually do things. And now within the framework of the sort of the non sort of fear of being rejected and
Mm.
the excitement of taking a risk that may or may not be rejected is you now have said, I'm not going to be rejected. We're going to be doing something,
Mm.
and so but that also can be fairly boring compared to the natural evolutionary type of
Sure.
finding each other and maybe good dealing with rejection or not. And so the usually the best combination solution is fantasizing, make believe
Mm.
I'm a football player that just caught the winning touchdown for our team in the
Mm.
playoffs. And my strong legs and you've spotted me and tried to get my attention for weeks, and now I'm beginning to maybe
Mm.
focus on you and notice you, but the girlfriend next to you is really flirting with me also, and you may or may not get to me. And so then you create a little fantasy in your mind
Mm.
that reenacts that sort of evolutionary possibility, and you can have about the best of both worlds that
Yeah.
you can have without it ever, and then also lowering your expectations. What we have here is stability. We have real love. We have a type of warmth that is not,
Mm.
that did not happen with the couple when they first met at that party,
Yeah.
and so on. And so making sure your expectations are that you're not going to just have this happen in the middle of taking care of making lunches for your grandchildren or
Yeah.
doing
Exactly.
anything else.
Well, and I found over the years that sort of giving somebody the best day you can when it comes to days when you're having sex, the big difference for me, from when I think back when I was a teenager and a younger man, is that again, because the relationship has grown, I have found that the truest form of selfishness, if you want to put it this way, that sort of plays into what you were just talking about, that I think is very true and very wise, is that if you're really concentrating on your partner having the best time that you can offer at age 73 after all these years together, it actually is far more arousing than the smash and grab selfishness that used to be the way sex was at a certain time in my life, taking and taking. And actually, it's one of these things, again, like happy wife, happy life. It sounds like a truism, but, sexually fulfilled wife, happy male, because there's nothing
Mm,
more arousing or gratifying than somebody else's pleasure. It's the reason I cook for my family. It
mhm,
had nothing to do with just sex. I mean, nothing makes me happier than cooking for Jeannie and having her say, this is absolutely perfect. I've never had fish this good before. How did you do this? Very specific praise, like you talk about. Um, when she travels, goes and visits her sisters in California, I don't cook for myself like that. I get zero pleasure from it. I
mhm,
mean, I don't
mhm.
enjoy just doing this in a vacuum.
Yes.
And I find the same thing when it comes to sexuality. So it sounds sort of smarmy and do-goodism, but actually, as a pretty robust male who likes having sex with his wife, what I've learned over the years is what it's really about is, again, her pleasure. And then weirdly, this selfishness is paid back in dividends because, again, she's happy and therefore I am. Well, the same thing with cooking, the
Mm,
same thing with childcare. I mean, the happiest moment of my life picking grandchildren up at school is that they run through a parking lot and give me a hug.
uh,
I mean, that's it. That's the gold medal.
mhm.
Um, so I don't, these aren't to me, these ideas are not unassociated. It's sort of just a way of looking at life. And I think that's what your book is about. I mean, correct me if I'm not putting words in your mouth, but um, you talk about unhappy women. Unlike grandma, almost every woman in the middle class and above in developed nations in the past half century has been encouraged to find their passion, or what Maslow calls self actualization, achieving one's full potential, including through creative activities. However, esteem needs are often in conflict. And I thought this was an incredible point that you made for men and women, and I want you to go into it. So I'm going to repeat this. However, esteem needs are often in conflict with self actualization. So then you talk about a corporate partner and a law firm and so forth, but this cuts both ways. Again, it's a men thing and it's a women thing. And I love this idea that self actualization doesn't necessarily fulfill the esteem part of our lives.
Yes.
And
This
I
is
love how you map that out for men and then how you talk about women. If you don't mind just talking about that a little bit.
sure. Yeah, we often think of self-actualization as a result of Maslow as being like at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
But what men have learned traditionally is to give up thinking about what you love to do
Yeah.
and trade that off for what you need to do to
Yeah.
earn enough money so that the family can survive. And so the I think the people who work on this best is the Japanese,
Mm.
who have a word called karoshi, and karoshi means death at the desk or death from overwork.
Yeah.
And they have a game that they play that is related to that. And the person that wins the game, that gets to the top of the corporate ladder first,
Yeah.
he commits suicide. Now, why does he commit suicide? Because he recognizes that he has lost
Yes.
being a human being. He traded that off for being a human doing. And as a human doing, he lost being a human being, which is that he committed suicide as a human being.
Sure.
And that was the history of masculinity,
Mm.
was thinking that you got to the top of a corporate ladder or some other type of ladder. It could
Mm.
be an author or whatever, but in order to do that, you frequently traded the rest of your life. You worked too hard, and you didn't have time with your children. You didn't have time with your
Yeah.
wife. You didn't develop really close friends. You had to, if you were in corporations, especially, you had to make sure you didn't share vulnerabilities that would make you less likely to be promoted.
Yeah.
And so you traded off being a human being for being a human doing. So
Mm.
you were the self-actualization scale of Maslow is the exact opposite of the traditional masculinity
Mm,
scale. The only time with traditional masculinity that you could really focus on being a human being,
mm,
and really, how can I be warm to my wife? How can I have time with my family? Is after you had accomplished everything else, and made yourself really secure that you had gotten enough esteem, and then you could take time to really be a human being. And
mm,
usually, most people who had worked through all those other things had not learned to the skill sets of being vulnerable and open and loving, and or had the time to do that. And
mm,
so, in the Role Mate to Soulmate book, I sort of outlined the Maslow scale,
mm,
of a hierarchy of values versus what men learn to do in order to be accepted and chosen by women who
yeah.
would then complain about men not being the warm, open, loving people they wanted and didn't choose.
Yeah, and the two things cancel each other out. I mean, you're not
They
this
very,
warm, open,
yes,
loving person if you're this doer.
yes, yes. I mean,
You write in this soulmate wisdom. You say the path to relationship wealth is appreciating your partner as if you are panning for gold. The path to relationship wealth involves ignoring our loved ones' little stones, as if you're panning, so the gold is not the stones, and panning for loved ones' gold. The path to relationship poverty involves walking over our partner's gold without noticing it. The path to the end of a relationship is both focusing on little stones and ignoring the gold. I love this section, by the way. It's so
mhm,
true. The secret sauce of relationship wealth is both appreciating our partner and making our appreciation specific. Specific appreciations fill our reservoir of love. If our reservoir of love is empty, there is no incentive to discipline oneself to sustain an empty reservoir. That's why mastering the art of discipline of specific appreciation is the first of the seven secrets. And that's something you deal with all the way through here. And then you say, the secret sauce of relationship wealth is both appreciating our partner and making our appreciation specific. I think that is really important. Way down later in the book, toward the conclusion, you say overcoming the barriers to deeper love takes more than reading Role Mate to Soulmate. It takes practicing it. Similarly, the online video course is effective not in viewing, but in the doing. This is because the Achilles heel of humans is our inability to handle personal criticism from a loved one without becoming defensive. So I just want to make sure as we go through this to do two things. First of all, I'd like to offer this book as part of our book club. It has to be read. And maybe Ernie will text me in the message section what month we can do this. And then lastly, I want to make sure that you stay on after I sign off and we're done here and talk to Ernie for a second about how we can tie into your video course.
absolutely.
Because I really want to promote that because the book is sort of a handbook, but it goes with something else. And if you really want to appreciate um, what Warren is doing here, the video course is really helpful and has helped a lot of people put together their relationships at whatever stage of life you're at. So I just want to say that on the way through. So talk a little bit about this video course that you're doing. And Ernie has texted me and said that March is when it will be our book club offering in March.
Terrific.
So it's
Very
coming
good.
right up. And so
Um,
that will be what we're offering in March. Meanwhile, talk a little bit about Roommate Soulmate video. What is that all about, the video course?
Yes, during the our big shutdown, we there was the courses that I was doing at places like Esalen and Big Sur were canceled, and and I had time to sort of create to do a course online with a couple of couples.
Yeah,
One of whom was absolutely brilliant, and the other one who was very conservative. So there are different types of couples, and I put them through the 10-hour course that I do usually in workshops.
yeah,
And the result of that, and then I was able to go back and edit it. So in many ways, it's a more precise course than
yeah,
I even do in real life. And then people who took that found that was real and did it together found it was really helpful.
yeah.
And so a lot of people cannot afford to, fly to Esalen and, spend a few $1,000s on a course. And so
Sure.
I'm now trying to make that course available to as many people as possible for as little
Yeah.
as possible. So I persuaded the publisher to have a, QR code put in the appendix of the
Yeah, I
Rollmate to
saw it in the
Soulmate
book.
book. And
Yeah.
so you can just go to that QR code, and for $97, you can get that whole 10-hour
Well,
course.
we're going to make it available. We're going to make sure that code is wherever we promote your book and also this particular um, interview. So Ernie will include it in that as well. So we're going to do everything we can to point people in that direction. And I would encourage people, as I say, and in the meantime, if you meet some woman that says, I love my husband, but he's absolutely impossible, give him my book. The Gospel of Zip and say, if Frank Schaeffer could pull this off after 56 years, having been groomed to be an asshole by divine right and changed to the point where he's busy in the morning making grandchildren's sandwich lunches, um, you can too. Because all joking aside, your book means so much to me because it really reflects a learning curve that I made the hard way.
Thank you so much,
You know what
Frank.
I'm saying? In other words, it's like, I'm out there floundering around doing this, and then, I crawl out of the water at the end, and there was a boat there the whole time.
Yes.
I could have just taken the ferry. I didn't have to swim the
Yeah.
Merrimack River.
Well,
But honestly, I love your book. I really do. And I would just say to people, if you're trying to put a relationship together or save a marriage or keep one or figure out what you want, there's a lot of crap out there, and God help us from the influencers that are influencing us without information. The factless influencers. But Warren really knows what he's talking about, and I would really urge you, if you're interested in trying to have relationships that work, this is an absolute must read.
well, thank you very much. And this is exactly the purpose of my taking the years to write this book and
Yeah,
to do the workshop was hoping that especially people like yourself who really have been through it, that
yeah,
being able to pick up on that accumulative wisdom and then also seeing with the Rollmate to Soulmate in course form.
yeah.
I give all the people in the course, they call me up a month and a half, 2 months after they do the course,
Mm,
and they told me what worked and what didn't work
yeah,
in their real life.
yeah,
And that was really, I want to give credit to all those people that did the follow-up calls because
yeah,
they differentiated, Warren, this worked, but then they didn't mention this or that. So,
yeah.
why am I focusing on making the course
Mm.
include things that didn't actually have a positive impact on their life?
Yeah, and you kind of gave it a test run. And the thing that I find remarkable about the book, as and I said this before, but it really bears repeating. I've interviewed a lot of best-selling women authors in the last 4 or 5 years who have a lot to say about what men should be doing and or why they're not so desirable or a critique. Okay, fine, they have every right to write those books. But what's very refreshing about your approach is that, and I know this sounds very obvious when it comes to heterosexual relationships, but you not only have room for men, as a male, I feel you are very much rooting for me to succeed. You're on my side. And that's unusual because I don't read very many women authors who seem to be rooting for the men in their lives. They're telling them how to improve, but they don't seem to be seeing things from the perspective of, hey, it's tough being a human being. It's not that men were given an easy path and women just, had to struggle. It's human struggle. And I love that aspect of your work. And as someone with feminist credentials, you're able to say that very credibly. And I just think you're a one-off when it comes to that.
Thank you very much. If you're listening to this and you're husband and wife with children, the thing that I most recommend
Hmm.
is there's a chapter in the Boy Crisis book on the different parenting styles of dads versus moms,
Yes.
and how to make those parenting styles combined so you
Hmm.
get the best of both worlds. What
Yeah,
I
because you talk about roughhousing and how women
Yeah,
see it,
yes.
and you've got this the kid sees it this way, and the man, and then the way the wife's seeing it,
Yes, yes.
he's tossed the child 50 feet into the air, and he's gonna break both
The, the,
legs.
the,
I love that.
the woman sees the man as having tossed the child 50 feet in the air.
Yeah,
The man sees the woman as having just barely tossed the child,
yeah,
and the
and the
child
kid
is
sort of
somewhere in
sees the
between.
reality. He's actually 3 feet up.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's brilliant. I mean, you've really done a service to males, and women who love men are going to love this work because, the women who love men are on men's side too. They want to help us,
Absolutely.
and we want to help them.
You know,
So I
and
love it. There's a mutuality in your approach that I just find so refreshing.
yes, for me, the mutuality is the important thing. We all, when only one sex wins, both sexes lose.
I totally
And
agree. I mean, that's so true. And boy, do we see it in the number of people who are choosing not to have children, not to start families, not even dating. I mean, I haven't gone into this in this interview, but you're so aware of this mess. I mean, the whole relationship thing, whether to have children or not, it's all up in the air right now. So obviously, whatever's happening is not working terribly well.
yes. It's really wonderful talking with you, and especially since you come from so many years of experience, and since
Yeah,
you've really done the introspection, and since you care so much about your wife, your children, and your grandchildren, and that you're acting out all the things that I care about men being and our
yeah,
relationship being and children having as their parents and grandparents. And you
yeah.
really personify that so
Well,
much.
and I would hope that people would read The Boy Crisis and Rollmate, Soulmate in whatever order they find it convenient. But in all honesty, these are two books that really coexist. They're not the same book, but they really, one helps the other. And I read them both with great appreciation. So listen, Warren, thank you so much. Stay on a minute and talk to
Mhm.
Ernie so we can
Sure.
make sure we connect with all your stuff and put the right codes up and get everybody rooting for you, and come back in March, everyone, and read the book in our book club.
Looking very forward to that. And
Yeah, me too.
it's
Warren, thanks
been
so much. Thanks for your time.
another wonderful discussion with you.
Yeah, really great. Love
Yes.
talking with you. Okay, bye.